This is the full walkthrough of one of my sewing patterns, Top Frances. It can be made as top or as blouse with front fastening. In this video I will show you the top. The link to the pattern is in the description, but I think also without the pattern this video can give lots of valuable information. So enjoy! I'm Marjolein Turin, designer of Somnia Romantica, and with this project, Somnia Sewing Guild, I make patterns and tutorials available for home sewing. I made a separate video with all you need to know about Somnia Romantica, Somnia Sewing Guild, the patterns and how to use them. Let's start. Tools. Obviously I use threads. I also have a sewing machine and a serger. You can of course also sew by only machine or by hand. Next to this I use the following things: tailor's chalk. This is a refillable tailor's chalk pen, a fine scissor and a fabric scissor, measuring tape. This one has inches on one side and centimeters on the other side. Also both starting at the same place, so it's basically a converter. Pins, weights for keeping the fabrics or patterns in place, a stitch ripper, you will always need this, a very fine needle, and yes, it was not curved when I bought it, and when sewing with the machines I recommend a noise cancelling headphone. It saves your ears, and of course if you listen something, do it on a low volume. Fabric recommendations. For the Frances top I advise, certainly for the top of course, a stretchy fabric. If it has a good stretch it does not need any fastening. You can also use a more sturdy version with a bit of stretch, and then I advise to make a fastening somewhere. With the blouse, of course, you can also use non-stretch fabric, but be sure to leave enough room in the side seams and to not make any definitive cuts before making sure that the pattern fits well. Things I used often are stretch velour, stretch velvet, stretch lace, lycra and tricot, like knitted fabrics, jersey. I will do a special soon about the fabrics that I use, and as soon as it's finished I will put the link up here. I would, for the inner sleeve, advise a tulle or mesh, especially if you work with a sheer fabric for the puff sleeve. You can let this tulle or mesh match your skin tone or the color of the piece you're working on. Other materials. For the decoration of the hem of the puff sleeve you can use whatever you like. I often use a broader lace and a finer lace or trim, and this can be stretch or non-stretch as long as you make sure that the biceps fits around your arm. For the hem of the bodice, at the bottom I would recommend stretchy lace, unless you make really sure that the hem of the bodice fits over your head or if you have a fastening somewhere. I often use a broader lace with a finer lace over it for this. For the neckline it's pretty important that you use something that is not too thick. You can of course not use any decoration, then you see the wrinkled fabric, that's also pretty cute. But otherwise I use fine lace, it could be stretch or non-stretch, because you sew it on while you stretch out the hem and the elastic wrinkles it together. There's also no pleating in this neckline. And the nicest is a lace that has nice finishing on both sides, especially on the top side of your neckline, because you can see that side very well. And then you can go all out with decorations. I have done so many things. In this video I keep it simple. I will later on make tutorials and pattern extensions for all kind of variation. Drawing and cutting the pattern. You can cut the pattern the way you like. I always cut it without seam allowance and trace it with chalk and then cut around the pattern, but to each their own. With this particular pattern I wanted to show how I do the seams at the front, the bust seams, because it can be tricky to cut them and I want to not cut them all the way through. So I first cut out the two upper parts of the bust seam and then I put it together with the lower part and then cut to almost the end, but just like half an inch to 2 centimeters from the bottom. And there I cut it off. This way you can still easily draw the seams, but the pattern is less flimsy. After assembling the whole pattern, you can find out the best way to lay them down on the fabric. Here are some suggestions. This time I make the top, so I place the mid of the bodice on the fold. Here's my happy Aaaannnd who makes this tape put. This is very slippery lycra, so it's necessary to put a weight on it and then still constantly make small markings and try to tame the fabric with my hands. I make sure the marking is all the way up to the top of the bust seams, and I even put a little pin there to mark it, because this defines the line from the mid bust to under the bust. I mark it all, cut it all out. The bust seams, I just make a sort of incision. Can I say that in this context? I hope so. But I cut up to 1 centimeter or 3/4 of an inch from the upper part of the bust seam, because you want to have room for the finishing. I also mark the mid-front of the bodice, as this is a very important place for later on. I draw and cut out the other pieces, the mid-back, the side back and the puff sleeve. So you can either do the puff sleeve twice on the mid-fold, but in this case the fabric is wide enough to cut it once on the width of the fabric. I mark the mid, draw one side, flip it around, put the weight on and mark the other side. Cutting it now, I only need the second inner sleeve because I drew that on the fold of the fabric, and then I'm done with cutting the pattern. I fold the fabric and put it away. I fold the pattern, and for this I just used the A4 or letter size sleeves, which are open on 2 sides with a little sticker on it, so you know what goes into it. This is a very easy way to store your patterns, and these you can all store in an organizer. Yay. This happy puddle will be accompanied by these 2 cute laces and a lace trim. I always have a assorted box of lace trim remnants, and here I decided on an elastic lace trim as all the materials have stretch. Of course you can also do a non-stretch one, all materials happily together, and we go to the serger. I pin over the seam. As you see, those bust seams, I do them in a tapered way, so they sort of dissolve into the fabric at the bust and they get also tapered at the lower end. All other seams are just even over the whole length. I do advise to pin it and be very careful with where you start. I strongly advise to do it by the sewing machine or by hand, as you will have more control over the preciseness of the stitch. There we go. I make sure that the ends meet together. As these are stretch fabrics, it's easy to get one stretched out or wrinkled in. Then I sew the mid back and side back together. One curves in, one curves out, so this is also a bit tricky. I advise to pin it. And the mid back seam, I give the separate pieces a stitch and will later sew them together with the sewing machine. But first, at the sewing machine, I will sew the puff sleeve onto the inner sleeve. Place them onto each other, both good sides up, pin the mid and pin the sides. And then I first sew the side seam of the puff sleeve onto the side seam of the inner sleeve, and then also about 3 inches or 8 centimeters at the shoulder part and at the biceps part. Do this really not immediately by serger if you have one, but first by sewing machine or by hand. Then you can pleat the room in between. I made the pleat so that you can make like 5 pleats with a little room between each pleat. I pleat them from the mid to one way and from the mid to the other way. I like to pleat the shoulder part downward and the biceps part upward, but this is just personal. I may even change that someday, but you can pleat it any way you like. I will make a pleating special. There are so many pleating options. One of the main thing I do is pleating lace. That's what I do. Yeah. Then I sew the back halves of the bodice onto each other and give it a straight stitch. And after this I fold it open and then give it a nice little stitch next to the back seam. You can use the line on the foot for making sure this line is as straight as possible. Yo-ho! I do the same for the shoulder seams. I flip the shoulder seams backward and give them a little stitch for firmness, and it looks neat. I go back to the serger and I put the neckline of the bodice through the serger. La 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 la. And also I'm giving the puff sleeves a stitch with the serger to secure it. This is like an overlock stitch on your sewing machine. And yeah, I'm sewing here the puff sleeve onto the bodice. Be aware, in this top the shoulder seams are a bit to the back. So the mid of the shoulder of the sleeve should be just in front of that. And then you sew it to one side and go back to the mid and sew it to the other side. After this I give it a firm stitch with the serger. Back to the sewing machine where I sew on the broader vintage lace. I give it pleat toward the mid, and at the mid of the pleat of the puff sleeve I also let the lace go the other direction. I'm sewing on the elastic lace trim. Here I must be careful that it doesn't stretch out too much. After this I can sew the side seams from the tip of the lace of the sleeves all the way to the bottom hem of the bodice. Time for one of the more fun parts that's also less fun. Time for the elastic neckline. I do this in a certain way and have been doing it for about 15 years, but I know there's a better way, so I will soon actually maybe follow a tutorial to see how this can be done better. I measure, it's for the size medium, the length for the mid-back to the shoulder seam, for the shoulder seam to the mid-front to the shoulder seam, and back to the back. If you sew on the blouse, you want to begin at the mid-front. I mark it with tailor's chalk. On white elastic you can see the tailor's chalk. I sometimes just put pins in it. And then I grab the side seam and I stretch it out all the way up to the point where it matches the length of the fabric. And then I sew it on. And the problem with this is you should really guide it, because if you pull it and the needle is in, your needle will break. And also it's not the most, if you're sensitive to injuries or you already have some problems with your hands or arms, this may be not the best method. You can of course use the technique of making a tunnel, and I will place a link to great methods for elastic as soon as I have it. In any case, this is something that works. I go all the way around. At the end I overlap it about 1.5 inch or 3.5 centimeter. So I make sure that it stays put. Then I cut it off, flip it around, stretch it out again, so that I make sure that when the neckline gets stretched out, the zigzag won't break. So everything with a zigzag, never with a straight stitch, these kind of things. And then I go all the way around again. And when this is done, I have this cute vintage stretch lace. I decide which way around I will sew it on. I place the blouse with the mid-back seam at the sewing machine and with the good side up. And I place the lace on it with the good side up, leaving some room for finishing. And then yet again I stretch out the fabric and sew on the lace with about 3/8 of an inch or a centimeter of lace peeping out from the hem. And then I sew all the way around. I'm pretty sure that this is a crazy method. But when I say I'm self-taught, I more or less mean it, as in I also barely watch tutorials. I was well on my way with sewing, and then I saw this. Funny holes in the lace. I thought, were they already here? No. It's just here. So there's a flaw in the lace. I should have checked. I always say check your lace before sewing and fabric, but I didn't. So the stitch ripper was my best friend for a while. I did not film it, and then I redid the neckline with a good piece of lace. Very annoying, but these things happen. Yeah, then at the end I cut it off with enough room to cover it in each other in such a way that the hem is aligned with the mid-back seam. This is just a method. There are many methods. Over time with all my videos you will see many different ways of finishing lace, from very lazy to very meticulous. I put the side seam through the serger. La-di-la-di-la, la-di-la-di-la. When the side seams are done, I can give the bottom hem a stitch all the way around. When this is done, I pin the mid-front, because this is a place where I change direction of the lace. Then I start at the side seam, because those are the most not visible places, and that's why they are the best places to finish your lace. Yeah, and then I start pleating one direction. I change direction at the mid-front and pleat the other direction, and then at the side I change again, and also on the mid-back. I'm also making sure that on every segment this top has 9 seams all around, and that in every segment between 2 seams there are the same amount of pleats. There is the same amount of pleats. You see, when I pleat it towards the machine, I constantly place my fingers left and right of the foot to make the lace stay put, otherwise it will curl around, which is definitely annoying. This lace is a bit wider than the lace at the neckline, so here I like to cut it off with well enough room and then give it a very dense zigzag stitch to sew both laces together. I cut away the excess fabric, be very careful to cut the right parts, and then I pleat the last part. Of course, again the pleats changing direction at the side seam. And if possible, I make it so that you can hide the dense zigzag seam in one of the pleats. And then we're done. You're cutting away the last little threads, and here's the result. A cute happy top, which can be worn on shoulder and also off shoulder. I think either way it's quite a dainty look. I think this top is a very flattering piece. Yeah, I'd say just go ahead, have fun with this piece, try out different fabrics. You can even make this top from an old big t-shirt or a jersey bedsheet, and you will see how nicely it looks. So happy sewing and see you in the next one. Bye bye!